Good morning. We're glad you're joining us this morning for Bible study. Abby is with me this morning as Pastor Scott is away. And so welcome, Abby. We're glad you're here with us. And our text is from Matthew 14. We are in our sermon series, Simply It Is Known. And it is how God knows us, how we come to know God, but then in the midst of knowing God, how that enables us to move out into the unknown and to do some great things. So Abby is going to read our text for us this morning.
All right. So Matthew 14, 22 through 33. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
So this text follows immediately on the heels of the feeding of the 5,000. Excuse me. And it is throughout this time that Jesus is working on his mission here on earth, but in the midst of that is trying to make himself known, who he is, to the disciples. And so this is a really rich text on how Jesus goes about making himself known.
Yeah.
So Abby, is there anything that drew your attention?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a story that we hear a lot, and it's one that I've known since I was really young, and so I was interested to see if I could find anything I hadn't thought about before.
Yes.
And so the first thing I was wondering was, so the Sea of Galilee. I don't really know anything about the Sea of Galilee, and so I wanted to know how big it was, how shallow it might possibly be. And so for those of you who don't know, the Sea of Galilee is actually one of the lowest freshwater and the second lowest lake in the world. It's 141 feet deep at its lowest point. It's about 8 miles wide and 13 miles long. So it's kind of small.
To be considered a sea,
yeah,
it's very small.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think in the English language, we'd probably think of it more as a lake.
Exactly.
Than a sea.
Exactly.
But then I was thinking, so the disciples are in this boat. We know they're kind of far away from shore, and even if they're like halfway to where they're going, that's probably like 4 to 6 miles out. And if Jesus doesn't have a boat to go halfway to where they are, he's going to be walking on the sea for a pretty long time. And I was wondering, Jesus doesn't necessarily lack foresight. So I can only imagine if I was going up to my friends walking on the water, I'm thinking, I'm going to scare these guys so bad. And so when I read, like, initially, like when I was younger, it said, "You have little faith, why do you doubt?" And I think of that as this teacher is coming to talk to me, and maybe they're chastising me. But then when I thought about, he's walking over to them, he might be scaring them. this is kind of a practical joke. Maybe he's laughing in the midst of it, but also like it's a serious note.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
You guys should have had more faith, but
Exactly.
So-
Exactly. I love that idea because in our humanity, you bet, it would be that way, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to walk over there and I'm going to sneak up on them and I'm
Yeah.
going to scare them. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, you know, there's a really important piece here that translated into English, we don't get it. All right? And it's important for the disciples. So if you look at verse 27, it says, "But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, 'Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid.'" Now that's translated into the English. In Greek, it would have literally said this, "Take heart, I am, do not be afraid." Now, for the disciples and for any of the Jewish people, I am is God.
yeah.
Because in the Old Testament, when they asked God what God's name was, God said, "I am." And so here it is, Jesus is using that. And again, we miss it because of the translation
Yeah,
into English.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, right. So Jesus is really saying to them, you know, I am God. And another critical piece about this is for them, the only one who can control the waters at all is God. And so here's Jesus displaying this also. But I like the idea in Jesus' humanity that maybe he did want to scare them a little bit.
Yeah, like perhaps.
Well, and you know, maybe it was the way to get a little rise out of them. And here's why I'm going to say that, all right? Hey, why that might be good is because down the very last piece here is, "Truly you are the Son of God." Now, it took him walking on water and saving Peter to do that. What happened to the feeding of the 5,000?
Yeah.
You know what? He just, and it wasn't even 5,000. I mean, it was probably double or triple that number because of women and children. And so he fed this many people with this much food, and nowhere does it say at the end of that the disciples declare him to be the Son of God. But it takes this. So maybe it is that, you know, that little bit of a jolt for them to finally go, oh, wait, yeah, he's doing some different things here.
Well, and this is kind of silly, but one of the reasons why they do silly and stupid, thrilling things on The Bachelor is to create a closer connection.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you put that scare in there and this amazing thing happened between all these people, that maybe they would have a stronger connection.
A bond with each other, absolutely. And we remember best the things and places where we have that bond, because we have to remember that all these stories were written down after the resurrection. So they're not writing these down. They don't go the next day and go, oh, let's get that story down because it might be important. So that bonding is critical, because after the resurrection, they come back together and they start saying to each other, well, remember when we were on the Sea of Galilee and the storm came up and Jesus walked out on the water? So that bond will help them remember and sort of put the pieces together. Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, the other question I had was, what did it mean for there to possibly be a ghost in that time period? What was their interpretation of that?
Yes. That's interesting because I'm not sure what that would have been, other than it probably would have been the same kind of thing that we think of when we think a ghost. But you know what, Abby, that's a great question, and I'd have to do a little study on that, especially because some people believed in the resurrection, some people then didn't. And I don't mean Jesus' resurrection. Some people believed that there was something after death, even, without really knowing what that was, and others didn't. So did the ones who did not believe in a resurrection or something beyond this life, did they influence what it meant to have a ghost there present?
Well, and I also know, like, the human brain has a tendency to make, like, we try to make sense of things. So if you see, like, a cloud and it looks like something, like a horse, like, we do that.
Absolutely.
And at night, yeah, that can definitely be kind of scary and weird.
Yes. But
yeah,
you bring up something great, though, is that these two pieces, the feeding of the 5,000 and this, are big. I mean, they're really, really huge pieces in coming to know who Jesus is and what Jesus' mission is here. And to that, maybe the disciples are trying to put this into their brain, and so they have to kind of control it. You're right. And so what is that walking toward us? It can't be a sea monster. I mean, they're scared of sea monsters. It can't be a sea monster. So what is it?
Well, and we know humans can't walk on water.
Exactly.
Like that's the big thing.
Exactly.
So.
Humans cannot walk on water. So who is this? And for them, Jesus is human. I mean, I'm not sure yet that they fully committed to him being the Messiah. I mean, it does say, truly you are the Son of God. But we'll see them in stories to come sliding backwards again. There's just this kind of, you are you? Mm-hmm. You are. In fact, it's even in here. In verse 28, Peter answered him, Lord, look at that two-letter word, if it is you. Even Peter's going, okay, nobody walks on water. He said this is Jesus, but if it is you. So there's this kind of back and forth between, I know it's you, but I'm not sure it's you. Yeah. And so even Peter waffles in this moment, which is interesting. I have to think, though, too, how exhausted Jesus must be. There's a piece of that because we learned last week that as he's coming into this story of feeding the 5,000, he is actually going off on his own because he's mourning the death of John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. And so when you are in grief, you really are tired. Yeah. You know, your body, your mind, your spirit, everything takes a part in that grieving. And so immediately, though, he comes upon 5,000 plus people that he begins teaching, right? I mean, he knows what his mission is, and so he begins teaching them, as exhausted as he is. And then he performs this miracle. And then it says he goes off by himself again, and then walks on water in the midst of this storm. And I know what it's like when you're in the midst of a storm. I was out in a boat one time, and I think it was a pontoon, when a storm hit, a bad storm hit. And so we had to really work to get to a place of safety, and then we worked to bring the top of the pontoon down, so we had a layer of protection. And so here, I have to think, Jesus is walking on the water in the midst of this storm. Everything here indicates that in his humanity, he should be exhausted, really. And yet, he still has more to give. I mean, he still comes to the disciples, and, you know, for most of us, it would be, you know, they're going, look, who is this? And Jesus goes, take heart, it is I am, do not be afraid. In our humanness, we might look at them and go, do you know what? I'm really tired. Why don't you quit, you know, complaining about yourself and think about me for a moment?
Well, and on the other hand, I also think sometimes in our grief we look for distractions. Mm-hmm. So this, like feeding the 5,000, it was an opportunity for him to like take a moment and not forget, but just kind of move towards something else and keep going.
But you know what? It's almost, in our grief, we also try to honor the dead. And so it could have been, too, same thing, that he was trying to honor John the Baptist, because John always knew what his mission was, and that was to point to the Messiah. So here's an honoring of John by continuing to do what he's been called to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is really, I love this, because it fits so well in our sermon series, in our theme, Known. Mm-hmm. Because not only is it that the disciples have to come to know who Jesus is and what the mission is here, because we have to remember, they're good Jewish men. And so for them, things have been skewed towards the law. And so Jesus' mission really is to bring it back to relationship. Not relationship with the law, but relationship with each other and relationship with God. And so that's a ship that's not going to turn quickly.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so here it is that they have to come to know who Jesus is and what they have to come to know the mission too, if they're the ones who are going to carry out the mission. And I think of this, I look at the disciples. This is really, I love the disciples, and I love Peter because he doesn't always get it. And yet he's the one that was charged, on this rock I will build my church. He's the one that really starts things when we get to Acts and we get to Pentecost, and how they are changed, and how they are people who, for whom the message started with them, basically. And 2,000 plus years it's still going on.
Yeah.
And so I think, I often wonder about my screw-ups, my missteps, my mistakes. And I think, gosh, you know what? I think God knows my heart. There's the known part. God knows my heart, and that I'm trying to do and be a part of the mission. And that's where forgiveness comes in.
Yeah.
And these missteps will happen. We're human. And like Peter, if it is you, and Peter often had missteps. And it is knowing who Jesus is, knowing who the mission is. But again, this is Jesus getting to know them and getting to know how much work is this going to be, really? How much work is this going to be? Yes. So I think that's a good place for us to stop. Thank you for joining us again this morning, and thank you, Abby, for being a part of the conversation with me. And we continue our sermon series. We hope that you join us on Sunday morning as Pastor Scott preaches on our topic, known, and we'll enjoy the direction that he takes with this text. So thank you.